Thank you, everybody, for joining our webinar. Today's topic is Supercharge Your Career in Project Management from Entry Level to the Chief Project Officer. My name is Dr. T. Wu, and I'm the CEO of PMO Advisory. And a couple things to highlight my career. I have played a role project manager, really from the grounds up. I entered the job market in about 1994, started working as a coordinator, actually as a tech writer, and then became a coordinator, and worked my way up until leading some of the largest portfolio in fairly large and significant companies. Today, in many ways, I play three roles. I'm a university professor. Some of you are my students, I think, here. I am the CEO of PMO Advisory, which we are a premier authorized training partner with PMI. And then lastly, I play various roles on global standards. With Project Management Institute, I was on the core committee for portfolio, for risk management. I also work on ISO, representing the United States, in the project program and portfolio management technical committee. So we also develop standards there. So in some ways, you could see my role as one of an academic, as a teacher, as a trainer, as a researcher, one as a practitioner, PMO Advisory. We still help clients with consulting in addition to training, and one in the standard writing world, trying to promote as well as advance project management. I think because of those combination of roles, it gives me some unique perspective, both into the past, the present, as well as the future of this profession and where it's going. And in this session, my hope is to share some of those thoughts, but also encourage people and give you sort of a roadmap to help you strategize in how to plan your career and really supercharge it and move it forward. So at the conclusion of today's presentation, participants will be able to, one, gain a full understanding of the project management roles. And there are many, from the entry point, which is coordinator, junior project manager, analyst, all the way through professional project management, program management, portfolio management, eventually into chief project officer. My other hope is to help you conceptualize a career roadmap. I think this field is exciting. It's vibrant. It's changing. It's dynamic. There are a lot of new knowledge, a lot of new information. And my hope is that as my company, PMO Advisory, but also as my university professor, I help all of you and guide you along this journey. So the key takeaway really at the end of the day is I hope everybody can grab a paper, pencil, start jotting down ideas and start forming that roadmap to supercharge your career. So let's start a little bit why this field is frankly quite exciting and also challenging. And it comes down to really the environment in which we currently exist. If you, for example, work in industry that's relatively calm and steady, then chances are projects, of course, is going to be there. But it's going to be largely fairly steady. They're fairly predictable. As you go toward the right, your industry moves faster. So let's say education traditionally is a fairly calm industry, right? As you go toward the right, let's say into the world of healthcare, the world of technology, the world of financial services, so it's high-speed trading in new financial products, now you're getting into an area that is faster, sometimes even turbulent, meaning people really don't know what that future is like. People are trying many different things. The dot-com era in the 2000s, for example, is a fairly unpredictable area. But it could also be even worse than that. You could have extreme change, hazardous, right? Think about the pandemic. When it occurred last year around this time, for people that remember, the world suddenly shut down. And if you work for an organization, what does that mean? How do you cope with the pandemic? How do you cope with change? There are industry today, they are changing very rapidly. Think of automation in some areas, for example. We don't know what that future is going to hold. We don't know, for example, what virtual holographic technology is going to take us. Microsoft just won a huge contract with U.S. military, for example. So if you're in those cutting, not even cutting, say bleeding edge, this is where projects becomes one of the dominant vehicle for organizations to really achieve their dreams. They may have a lot of ideas, but how do you get to a product? How do you get to a service that you could go to market? And that's where project management comes in. So unless you feel that the world's going to slow down, by the way, the pandemic didn't really slow the world down. It may slow a lot of sectors down, but as you can imagine, the acceleration in vaccine development, for example, the logistics of trying to distribute the vaccine, not just in the United States, but around the world, all of these are still very, very vibrant from a project management perspective. What makes project management challenging? So on one hand, you look at the bigger picture and you say, wow, there's a lot of project potentially out there. The other side, of course, is that itself is just one factor. Another factor is the reality of project execution today is that we're not very good at it as a whole. Study shows, for example, in governmental projects, overwhelming majority, we're talking about 80, 90%, experience severe delay. We're not talking about a day or two delay. We're talking about going over the original schedule sometimes by multiple times. In information technology, roughly 70% of the projects hit some kind of snag, and of those 70%, about a third outright just fail. So what makes projects challenging? There could be many factors, and we probably don't have time to go through all those factors, but just envision the work that you do every day. Talk about scenario work. Scenario one. Right? If you work in a regular work environment, you have tasks, you'll get to it. If you don't, it's not the end of the world. There's probably quite a bit of flexibility how you do the work and even what you achieve. So in that world, sort of a lot of regular work activities, you sort of get by. Some you do better than the others, but there aren't that many constraints. Scenario two. Think about traditional project management. And by the way, traditional project management is very well-lived. It's not dead by any means. So people today think of agile, extreme programming, etc., thinking, oh, the traditional is out of fashion. No, most projects are still traditional. They're traditional, they're classical, they're there. The traditional project management view that started propelling the 1950s to the present, really maybe largely 10 years ago, but still very much alive today, is that there are three constraints, sort of the trilemma of project management. And we call that the iron triangle, right? The idea of what to do, the scope, the schedule, how much time we have, and the cost. And anytime you think of any activity you do, if you start squeezing one of them, meaning you try to do it faster, right? Or you're trying to do it with less money, or you try to do more with less, it gets more difficult. And that is just the general environment of project management. Now, of course, in contemporary projects, we started thinking more complicated terms, partly because we as human endeavors try to do something bigger and greater. Think about the $2 trillion that may come down to the economy for infrastructure projects. More and more projects have interdependencies. It depends on the political environment, meaning stakeholder. So once you start thinking and broadly about projects, the reality is project can be quite complex. And scenario three is today's scenario. So long and short of it is anytime when you do something, you start squeezing, try to fit more into the bucket, you try to do it in faster time, inevitably the world gets more complicated. And those are the core of the project management challenges. Now, of course, it could be even beyond that. If you're trying to do something that's cutting edge, bleeding edge, going back to the graph before, if you're all the way on the right, which means that you really don't know what the end result's going to be like until you get there, that gets much harder. Think about SpaceX, right? Every couple of weeks, I feel like I'm reading something about their latest test capsule exploding. Right? Maybe it is a part of the innovation curve, but as you can see, there are a lot of challenges. There are examples of project challenges everywhere. This is a chart that I actually created from one of my most recent book, Optimizing Project Management. And in my book, I talk about 10 knowledge domains. 12 knowledge domains. So a little bit more than, say, the PMBOK 10 knowledge areas. The two I added are conflict and governance. So you may want to pause this slide. I'm not going to cover every one of these bullets. As you can imagine, it will take a little while. So for those of you who's listening to this, you may want to pause and just take a quick scan. Here, I'm just going to look through, let's say, schedule. Right? Anytime when you talk about schedule, when work is compressed because of time, right? The challenges gets in multiple fold. One, initially, how do you estimate the time? How do you get the buy-in from all the stakeholders? What are the dependencies? You know, in project management, when we think about schedule, it's not a pure time itself. There can be a lot of tasks, there's a lot of overlapping dependencies and relationship. So trying to sequence them can be quite difficult. Finding out critical path is another challenge sometimes on project, especially with a project on multiple critical paths. You know that is proportional to risk. And then, of course, there are a lot of other limiting factors such as cash flow, right, from a budget perspective, people. All of these introduce new challenge to a project. So I just picked schedule here as one element, but every one of the other 11 domains have its own core challenges. Never let a good crisis to waste. So what I'm painting here is that on one hand, you have a vibrant environment in which project exists. I don't think in the foreseeable future, in my lifetime probably, that we will say the world is so stable that we no longer have project. If anything, project will become so common that at some point project management may not even be seen as a special situation or case, a discipline in management. It just becomes the management. So the environment is vibrant. On the second side, of course, you have a lot of challenges, so which means that this field requires new ideas, new people, new talent, new way of doing things. And that is almost a perfect brew for opportunities. So I think that as project managers, one of the things that we ought to learn is leverage the crisis. For example, in the university I work with, some years ago, we had a project in which we didn't do too well. It actually got national attention and showed up in a lot of press. Well, what did our school do? Well, we built PMO. We built project management capability. I was a professor, adjunct professor at the time. We started building curriculum in it. Because we know that this challenge that we face in our university isn't unique. Every one of you probably have experience with projects that at least were confronting those challenging situations, in some worst cases may even likely fail. So you learn from those lessons. When you look at project management, the financial reward is also there. PMI did this study some years ago, about 2017 timeframe, and they looked at across the various industries, and they call it the project management oriented occupation. So the ones that's about newness, creating change in organization, versus job roles that are non-project management, they're in fairly operational, steady state role. You could see over time this premium in the gap start to increase. This is because people who work in project are likely to confront more risks. They're likely to tackle bigger problems for the organization. And, of course, the reward is also there. By the way, this is just one metric. PMI in 2000 released the 11th annual survey of the project management salary survey. They surveyed, I think, about 42 countries across 30,000 plus professionals in the world. And they found, for example, in countries such as Philippines, the gap between those who have PMP and who doesn't have PMP is almost 80% gap, which is huge. Actually, it's what you see here almost. By the way, in the United States, the gap, or what we call the PMP premium, is about 26%, which still is very, very significant. So hopefully I have convinced you so far that project management is a worthy career to look at. So let's now dive into the heart of today's presentation, which is really about supercharge your career. Now, one thing I should mention is if you have questions, please jump in with your questions using chat messages. And while I do pause to ask if there are any questions, you can unmute yourself. I know everybody's muted, but you can unmute yourself and ask questions directly. So your choice, using chat or unmute yourself at the appropriate time. Okay? And I do like to make it interactive. Otherwise, this can be a fairly fast presentation. So let's look at the career ladder. And sort of in a general fashion, I broke it into what I consider 4 levels. You have the entry level. Generally speaking, that's for people from year 1 to year 3. In some cases, it could be year 5. Depends how much concentrated time you work in project management. Then you have the skill track. This is when you become a real professional, right? You earn the stripes. You probably get some certification along the way. This is usually between the career, say, year 3 to 4, maybe 5, all the way to 8, maybe 10. Beyond that, you get into the scenario in which you are becoming expert in your own right. You probably have at that point focused on one or more industries or professions or functions. So you're gaining quite a bit of insights. And that, by the way, can be the rest of your career. Some people don't like to necessarily move to the executive role. Not everybody likes to, for example, play with politics, because at the executive level, usually that's somewhat unavoidable. But some of you do go on to play the executive role and will want to do that, aspire to do that, so you have the executive role. When you're at the entry level, a lot of the work you do are fairly specific. Right? You're coordinating activities, communicating with different teams, looking at data, learn how to best manage project, and you probably assist your project manager on a variety of project management activities. And at the tail end of the entry level, you probably are managing smaller teams or projects in your own right. When you get to the skill, this is where you really become more of an independent player. That doesn't mean that you don't have any oversight. In certain organizations, larger organizations, I know one like Novartis, for example, project manager, you will have different level, project manager 1, project manager 2. Right? Those 1 and 2 connotates essentially how much organization trusts you with budgets and responsibilities. Here, you're probably leading project management, projects yourself, doing project management work deliverables. You're probably tackling specific challenges, working with difficult stakeholders, for example, and the project you manage probably becomes increasingly more complex. When you become an expert, the difference between a skilled person and expert is an expert really start to shift from just managing resources, organizing a project, to making decisions, setting directions, tackling some of the bigger challenges. You probably start directly manage large and complex projects. You may develop best practices and methods for organizations. The outer end of the expert role is you start to really work more on the strategy side, making sure that what you're doing, the project, is aligned with that of the strategy. And then, of course, beyond that, and some people, by the way, like that role. They don't necessarily want to go to executive role. In my career later, I'll talk about, I actually went sort of from this professional expert role to executive role, sort of got bored with the executive role, reverted back to the expert role, and sort of started just playing both of these spaces. Because when you get to the executive role, the minute when you start working with the organization, aligning and prioritizing projects, guess what? It's controversial. If you prioritize one person's project over somebody else, there could be a lot of explanation, a lot of clash of personality. So executive role, yeah, it may sound great and sexy in some ways, but it comes with a certain burden. But if you do go to that role, then you are looking at prioritization, aligning strategy, establishing governance, and ultimately accountable for achieving business value versus just delivering the project deliverables. Okay? So that's the primary difference. And we'll look at this one a little bit more specific. So if you break down the roles likely to see under this umbrella, you have on the entry level, really the project team member. Most of us probably started in project management by accident, meaning we were asked to join team. Maybe we were serving as an expert or a coordinator. Next thing you know, we did something well, we sort of stuck and do more of those work. And assuming you like it, you may help out with project management, became a project analyst, coordinator, right? And then at some point, you may start leading your own project, junior project manager. As you get skilled, your title probably shift from junior project manager or project manager 1 to project manager 2 to senior project manager. And then at the expert level, on the upper end of project management, you're probably no longer dealing with single projects. You're more likely to deal with a collection project, which, depending on how they are oriented, if they're very related, you're likely to get into the space of program management. Program management itself, the term is not that well established in the project management community. To different companies, they actually mean slightly different things. In PMI, the definition they use is a collection-related project that, when done collectively in this program mode, you are achieving value or benefits that you couldn't achieve by managing those individual projects separately. Once you start managing programs, and I have managed some large programs in my career, you inevitably become quite important to the organization. If you can successfully deliver large programs, you're probably one of the few people who could deliver results, and organization value that. So program can get bigger and bigger. Some of my smaller projects initially, for example, was helping a major launch, and there were just so many different components with this client that it was treated as a program. My later program that I have managed, for example, building a whole new department in a financial service company, right? And building a new department, as you can imagine, requires a whole bunch of things. You need people to run it. You need business process so you know what to do. You need information technology system so it can be scaled. You need to have regulatory approval, at least in my case. And even if you don't have regulatory approval, you probably still need some kind of partner approval because most departments don't exist in isolation. At Accenture, we call that kind of setup capability, helping organizations build capabilities. When you're at the top end of the sort of the expert level, in a way, there is a decision to be made. And some of you may not explicitly make it, so you start sort of playing both roles. Where I was in that role, leading fairly large project program, inevitably at that time, I was already helping companies build sizable PMOs, project management offices. And one of the things that PMO likely get involved is there's a lot of projects, and you only have so many resources. So it's a very natural evolution that at some point you don't have resource for all the ideas and project people have. By the way, that happens in healthy organization. It's a good thing, but you could have too much of a good thing. So inevitably, you started moving toward the area of how do we best utilize the limited resources we have to achieve as many of these project goals as possible, right? Those sort of maximization resource questions, maximization value questions start to seep in. And if you do that strategically, looking at the strategy of the organization, the various priorities, the resources you have, what kind of governance you want to put in, well, guess what? You're now in the field of portfolio management. I like to think of program managers as sort of captains. I think of in the Navy, you're the captain of your own ship, or maybe even multiple ships, or targeted toward achieving some goals. At the portfolio level, you're really more like an admiral. You're not controlling one ship or a few. Likely you have an entire fleet of ships. And the goals are not so specific anymore. They tend to be broader and more strategic. Now, some people don't necessarily like to be the admiral. One of my favorite characters from Star Trek, James T. Kirk, his entire series of movies later on was his struggle that he doesn't really want to sit in a desk job and want to go command his own Starfleet, right? So that dynamic happened even in my career. I remember at one point that I became a portfolio manager and started really spending a lot of my time dealing with politics or personalities or feelings or interests. And frankly, it's tiring. So at the same point, in the same organization, I went to actually lead a major program. So instead of managing the fleet, managing a particular ship, and then went back and forth around that. So definitely for a lot of people, as you get to that upper realm, there is a question of deepening your program experience or going to the portfolio. And then the chief project officer. Now, chief project officer role is, of course, a C-level role. There are not that many C-level roles. I did a research on LinkedIn not too long ago, and I found roughly somewhere less than, I think, 3,000 chief project officers on LinkedIn. I don't vouch for that number, so there could be more now. But clearly, if you look for CFO, COO, CEO, or CTO, CIO, there are a lot more of those than CPO. And by the way, CPO itself can be confused with Chief People Officer, so you really have to look for Chief Project Officer. So in some ways, I still look at CPO as an aspirational role, because I'm not sure if most organizations today are ready for another C-level role. Having said that, though, projects are really important to most organizations. It is the mechanism for renewal and change. I recently wrote a paper published in the the Journal of Business Strategy about this particular role. And for those of you who's interested, feel free to shoot me an email, and later I'll give you my contact information. I'd be happy to share that article. So I do think it is there. It is clearly people having that title, but for mass majority of us, in vast majority of the organization, it is still somewhat aspirational. Nonetheless, having that aspiration, knowing this career ladder that you can climb, is vitally important. You know, one of the questions as you look at this, if I were you, I'd be asking is, where am I on this calendar, on this ladder? And where do I want to go? How much time do I want to give myself before I could get there? Right? Those are some of the career-specific questions that you ought to think. Now, one of the things that most of us can't truly control very well is the actual experience we gain. Yes, we could target certain jobs or certain function within the organization we want to go into, but the world's a complicated place. So there are certain things that you have better control over the other. One of the things that you are able to control is gaining that certification, that recognition. So I highly recommend for those of you who are serious about project management, consider some of the certifications. Now, PMI, Project Management Institute, of course, is not the only organization that has certification. XLO in Europe, for example, has almost complementary speaking, I think even a little more certification than what PMI has. And so depending where you are in the world, where is likely to be more recognized and marketable, you should pursue those. But since we are in the United States, at least I think most of us are here, and also PMI is really quite popular around the world, including Europe itself. I'm going to talk mostly about the PMI certification. Project Management Institute, some of you may know, is one of the world's largest project management professional organization. This number that I have here, you see these numbers, these are active certification holders. So for PMP, it's 1.04, roughly, million professionals. And this number is a bit outdated due to the pandemic. PMI actually stopped publishing PMI today, which this fact file is a part of that publication. So in some ways, I actually don't know how many PMPs there are today. I guess if I have to, I would say it's probably north of 1.05 million, maybe not quite 1.1 million. Okay. Of course, PMP is by far the biggest. But what makes PMI, I think, a fairly good way to look at the career is there are certifications that helps you really move yourself up to a new level. And then there's also very specific technical ones that help you hone in certain type of projects, certain type of areas. But the big takeaway from this is, depending where you are on that ladder, if you want to consider some of the, let's say, the more senior ones, such as program management that you see here, or portfolio management, well, there aren't that many people in it. Portfolio management, for example, is barely, I have to guess, probably north of 900 at this point, but probably not 1,000. So you still could be that first 1,000 person with that certification. One thing I should mention is a sort of a little brag moment, so I hope you don't mind, is if you look at the active PFMPs in the world today, I probably would be the first person in the United States to actually get that certification. There are others around the world that beat me, but in the United States alone, I think I'm the first one because I was a part of the early adopter group, and when I achieved my PFMP back in 2014, I think, there were only 121 of us, and of those, I was, I think, number 8. So given that people have to renew to stay in, and so hence I use the word active, right now I would have been the first in the United States that's still active. If you map the certifications to the career ladder that you have seen, this is how I vision it. This is, by the way, a chart, at least a version of this chart in one of my earlier books, The Sensible Guide to Career in Project Management. Here you can see that these certification complements very well as you start gaining experience and start climbing that ladder. Take CAPM, for example, something I highly recommend to my students in my project management classes. Is CAPM itself very well known outside of the project management profession? The answer is no. It's really not that well known. After all, there's still only less than 50,000 people in the world. But chances are, if you're a project manager or interested in project management, you want to pursue a career with other project managers. And those project managers probably know of CAPM. PMP speaks for itself. It is by far the most popular and well-known of the project management certification. Some years ago, I was at a conference, and even the people from PMI was telling me PMP as an acronym was more popular than PMI. But even if you have PMP, there's still specialty skills. There's the ACP, PBA, business analyst, risk management, scheduling, and then, of course, PMI, some of you follow, probably seeing that they're trying to work with discipline and agile. All of those are in this skill space. Now, some of the discipline agile may actually go on to being the expert and executive too. They're still developing it, by the way. Once you get to the expert level, this is where PGMP definitely stands out and PFMP start to creep in. I usually think of PGMP, as I jokingly call it, the height of the technical ladder for project management. So if you like to stay in the game, play a hands-on role, and actively lead projects and programs, PGMP is, at least right now, is sort of the top of that professional scale certification. On the other hand, if you like to work with people, organization, politics, and to some extent working with sort of the more shifting areas of budgets and strategies and prioritization, then PFMP, portfolio management, is the top of what I call the business track of project management. And of course, many people have both. Right? I have both, even though my role shifted from one side to the other over times. Because on the portfolio side, it does get exciting because you know you're making a huge influence on the organization. As the chief project officer, you'll be leading and also influencing a significant amount of budget in your organization. Some organizations today may have bigger project-oriented budget than even basic operation. It depends how fast the organization moves. So it definitely play that prominent role. On the other hand, some people do like to have the ability to declare regular successes or meet challenges and play a hands-on role in program management. So it does come down to a bit to personality and your preference. Both are very, very worthwhile pursuit. So knowing the career map and where you can go, what do you do now? So let's get tactical. Let's talk about some specific strategies and steps to help you build them. And here I come back to actually a Six Sigma framework, the PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act. It's easy to remember. It's easy to follow through. Plan, establish a goal. And I hope you establish things that you could stretch a little bit, right? So when you achieve it, you can feel proud. If you establish a very low goal, of course, you achieve it. Okay, good work, but you don't really feel that wow. And as you plan, think about ways that you could achieve those goals. Next, do. Implement the plan. Commit to action. One of, I think, the humans' both better side and the worst side happen to be the analysis paralysis. So if you plan something and you stay in planning too long, on one hand, you could argue you're being diligent. On the other hand, opportunities and time are slipping by. And in some cases, I have a preference for action, mainly because through action, you actually know whether you're going down the right track or the wrong track. If you sort of stay there and never actually do something about it and continue to analyze, it becomes sort of an ivory tower exercise because there's no reality to it. So I think you should plan and you should start doing. And maybe your first plan, the stretch goal, for example, shouldn't be too stretched so that you do want to build that positive momentum. Right? For example, if you are an entry-level project professional, sort of feel like you're stuck in your organization, you really want to get on a project, but there is no opportunity, maybe a small stretch goal is look for a volunteer organization in which you can play a leadership role. So you could exercise that project management skill you just learned. That's a bit stretch because you could probably find them. They're not that easy, and you have to find a leadership role there, but it is doable. The third step is check. Right? The minute you start doing things, now you have data coming back. Are you enjoying yourself? Your latest communication technique that you applied, did it work? Or was it too structured that people were just pushing back and they don't want to start meeting exactly on time because the culture of the organization is you give them 5 more minutes, for example. So you may have to adjust course a little bit. So you can review exam result, compare your actual result with that of your plan result, and to see how satisfied. Some cases you may go back to make some changes. Others you may proceed forward. And then sort of at the end of the cycle, you could look at the act. If the goals are achieved, then you may want to plan next higher level goals. If the goals are not achieved because it was a little too stretched, all right, then try again. Maybe it was a little bit lower expectation. Life is a journey. You could go through this many, many iterations throughout your career. But my sense is follow that plan. If you don't like plan, do, check, act, fine. Come up with your own method. This is, by no means the only methods out there for that kind of improvement. But it is important to always make stretch goals, try to go after metrics so you know if you're on the right track, if you know doing too much, too little, and then plan to adjust course. Life is not a linear path. There's a lot of little surprises along the way. So be ready for those. The next set of slides are going to be specific recommendations. And these recommendations are really based on the various levels. So, for example, if you are here because you're curious about project management, you really don't know whether you want to do or not, then I would say that explore, take a course. There's a lot of them online. Microsoft was making their LinkedIn Learning available for free, actually, for some time. I think that may expire yesterday. But through your library access, etc., you probably still could have a lot of access to this information. Project Management Institute has sometimes very interesting courses as well. Many of them are free. Even PMO Advisory, my company has started to release a series of 21 podcasts and also on YouTube that's really focusing on the details of project management. And most of those are available for free. So look for communication from my company. You may also want to join a chapter, professional organization, talk to people, attend a conference, network. And here, you could plan your goal. Your goal, for example, could be specific, pretty simple. Am I interested in project management? Do I want to learn more? Right? And by the way, you should have other career goals. Project management isn't the only thing in life by any means. So do some comparison if you're in that early stage of your career in which you could do exploration. Now, the next level, your entry level. You have made a decision that you really do want to explore project management. You have some basic knowledge, but you probably still lack serious experiences or credential. One of the best things to do, by the way, is at work, ask your manager to see what are the opportunities. I remember when I started out my career, you know, my managers always has been very supportive. If I do my day job, but want to do something else as an addition, don't forget your day job because day job is what they count you on doing. So find yourself into different roles. Maybe there's a small project. Hey, I like to represent my department on that project. So you start out as a subject matter expert, right? You also can volunteer to assist the project manager. The way I learned project management initially was because my manager was a pretty good project manager. And over time, I see how she were working on certain things. I asked, hey, can I help out with this? Of course, people love when additional people want to help. So over time, I learned the rope of the trade as well. Now, let's say you don't have those opportunities at work completely. You're on a different type of career path, job, but you want to experiment. Go to nonprofit. I mean, to this day, I volunteer in nonprofit. I'm, for example, right now the director of New York City, a PMI New York City chapter symposium. I'm the director of symposium. Why do I volunteer there? Well, because I have never managed large conferences before. And as I was looking at the checkbox of my project accomplishment, I have done a lot. I have worked on hundreds of $1 million worth of projects, but I actually never managed a conference. And I thought, maybe I should give it a try. And happened to be one of my old friends from New York City asked me to help to manage their symposia and as well as the professional development day. I said, sure. So volunteer in nonprofit. The last I checked, it takes a lot to get fired from working at nonprofit. So you really, really have to school up big. And assuming you're a capable person, chances are you'll do fine. You also could look at the next opportunity at your work. A lot of people always think grass are greener elsewhere, which may be true. This is not to say it's not true. But you should still look up very carefully where you are. And a lot of times, especially good organizations, they want to keep the good people they have. And then when you do have time to advance your skill, right, start looking at the PMI Global, attend professional meetings, come to this webinar, and maybe also consider the CACM certification because it serves as an important differentiator. When you get to the skill level, these are people somewhere between 3 to 10 years of experience, maybe 5 to 10. Right? This is when you have a couple of years of project management, especially working on project teams under your belt. Right? This is when you can now start to emerge from just doing to leading and making sure that your previous successes on the projects are something that can help you propel further. Nonprofit, for example, take leadership roles. Continue to look at strengthening your skills. Consider, for example, PMP and other specialized certification. One of the things I will say is it's often when people from colleges, et cetera, graduate from brand name schools, right? That's chip on their shoulder. If you graduate from Harvard or UPenn or Brown, that's something you can stand on their own. But what the certification are, say the PMP, they're sort of great equalizers. Because anybody from all walk of life can ultimately complete a PMP. And when organizations look for project management, and they really want that professional project manager, often it doesn't really matter what school they came from. What matters is have they attained certain certification. And that's why I look at certification as the great equalizer. Now you're in the experience level. You're a professional, very experienced in your field, but you're seeking additional growth. And your responsibilities, chances are also progressively increasing, managing larger projects or sometimes multiple projects. You probably have multiple routes that you could take at this point. Program management. These are for people who really, as I mentioned before, want to be the captain of their own ship, who want to be in the middle of the action. You could have portfolio management. These are really more the movers and shakers, the influencer, who's prioritizing projects, and equivalent to what I call the admirals. There's actually a third track, which is, by the way, none of these are completely mutually exclusive, of course. They are related. That's in the role of PMO managers. And if you're interested in helping the organization mature in project management, so a field that PMI sometimes called organization project management, to achieve and sustain execution excellence, develop new methodologies, right? PMO role can also be a very powerful role. Now, there's, by the way, in PMI world, there is no PMO certification. In Exlo, there is one for project officer, but not in the PMI world. And I don't exactly know where they are in development of these. That's something I'm hoping that they can do. Again, these roles are not mutually exclusive. And it could be a bit difficult to do all three of them at the same time, but any two of them is actually quite possible. So from a certification perspective, look at that program management or PGMP or portfolio management, PFMP. Final level that we're going to talk about here is the executive. Beyond the professional certification world, you get into really the areas of helping at the beginning part and eventually being a part of those executives making project decisions. Chief project officer, in my view, are the C-level executive that help organizations implement large change projects and also, quote-unquote, own this business execution, project execution capability in the organization. They are far more strategic than managing a portfolio, project, or program. They're responsible for the organization's readiness that includes transforming its culture, business processes, and tools to get ready to tackle an intense set of projects. Organization creates CPO. If you look at the 3,000 some CPOs out there, I think there are two primary reasons that CPO are created. One is to create a true enterprise PMO responsible for execution of very big projects. There may not be many in those organizations, but there could be top 5 project that is transforming the organization. And there you need somebody at that executive level that's equal to the other C-level who can take charge. That's number one. And number two, the organization realized that for whatever reason, it is not very effective at what it's doing. It may have a lot of ideas, but has a hard time translating those ideas and making them real. And that's another role for the Chief Project Officer, responsible for what I call the sustainable excellence in strategic business execution. So let's come back to the PDCA action plan. What's next, right? Create a roadmap for yourself. Here's how we'll go about doing it. So apply the PDCA mentality. Specifically, ask yourself a series of questions. What is your current level, role? Introspectively examine your interests, your strengths, your weaknesses. Examine the external factors surrounding your situation. Are you working in a fast growth industry, for example? Determine where you'd like to be in a year, 3 years, 5 years. And consider whether a professional certification, the 8 that we talked about, but there are many others, can help you. Next, do something. Avoid analysis paralysis. Too many people try to spend time to come up with their perfect plan. Guess what? The perfect plan usually doesn't survive the first major issue anyway. Chinese has an old saying, 1,000-kilometer journey starts with the first step. And the thing is, even if you're walking completely the wrong direction, if you have your sensors out, and if you have your metrics laid out, you will almost immediately know that you're going off in the wrong direction. and hence you could correct yourself and now marching toward the right direction. That is still better than analysis paralysis because you never even given your idea the opportunity to be real. Check your progress along the way. Compare your accomplishment. As I mentioned, even if you start the journey in the wrong direction, if you have enough sensors out there talking to people, you will know, oh God, this doesn't seem to be too optimal. And finally, act. Adjust your plans as needed. Remember to set stretch goals. It shouldn't be so stretched that it breaks you. Like at my age, for example, chances are it's probably not too fruitful to figure out how to climb Mount Everest. Right? Now, to get to the base camp, yeah, probably possible. Not that I have a huge desire to go to base camp, but just using that analogy. So stretch, but not to the point that it breaks you, because you want to build confidence. You want to have wins on top of wins. So that's how I do it. It's a very, very simple roadmap, and you can plan out yourself. So that's all I have for today. The rest is a little bit about my company, PMO Advisory. For those of you who obviously aren't here, either you're my students in one of my classes, or through some of my network, or through PMO Advisory email. So we are a premier authorized training partner. We jokingly call ourselves 1 inch wide because we're all about project management, but we also like to think of ourselves as 1 foot deep. Project, program, portfolio, risk, agile, PMO, organization change, business execution. That's what we do. For individuals and organization, we provide a variety of training, but predominantly the certification training. We are, for example, having pre-registration for PMP training that's coming up. So you may be interested for those. And for organization, we really provide not only the training side, but we also help you do what we set out to train. So we consult and we help you implement. For those of you who have want to claim a PDU, for those of you who are certified, here's the claims code that you can use. It is a strategic PDUs that you can claim. And any questions? Let me pause here to see if there are any questions. Okay. If there are no further questions, then let's call it the end of the webinar. This is a bit of information about me. And, okay, I do see some questions. Okay, let me go back to the code. So you could do that. And you can use that claims code to capture that 1 hour. Last call for questions. Going once, going twice. Okay, well, thank you again, everybody, for spending your lunch hour with us. I hope you find this presentation, Supercharge Your Career in Project Management, to be helpful. And if you have any further questions, you can always get in touch with me. As I mentioned, if any of you are interested to see the study with the Chief Project Officer, shoot me an email here. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day. Oh, I see there are a couple other questions. Give me 1 second. Let me stop recording.